Hey, coach. So, how much should I have in cash reserves? Well, it's not that easy to answer, but that's what we're going to talk about today on the Landlord Coach Daily Is show. Let's go ahead, let's drop the needle, and let's get going.
Five, four, three, two, one, zero, ignition, liftoff.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Landlord Coach Daily Is show. My name is Mark Dolfini and host of the Landlord Coach Daily Is show. It's really good to see you all. Thanks for showing up today. So this is a topic that I run into all the time with people who are looking to either grow their portfolios or have portfolios, and they maybe have some concerns about what to think about. How much should I have in cash reserves? So before we get too far down the road, I want to just go ahead, throw this up here, and this covers this very topic about cash reserves. Landlordcoach.com/5 mistakes. You can get that for free. Just go ahead over to that. And I'm going to turn my light on here. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now. But you can get that for free, that download. But again, what we're going to be talking about today is how much should we have in cash reserves? It's a really good question, and I get it. That's a conundrum of if you have too little, you're taking on too much risk, and if you have too much, well, you have lost opportunity because let's face it, we're at most banks, if you're lucky, might be paying 1%, maybe a little bit more, but realistically, you're not going to be getting very much in the bank, right? So how much should you have in cash reserves? And when I was thinking about this, how to answer this question, I always go back to, well, what's your vision? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And how do you analyze cash flow on your properties in the first place? So if you're a small business person or an entrepreneur, you run into this problem all the time. How much should I be setting aside in cash reserves? How much should I be planning on setting aside? Because, like right now, we're in the middle of a rainy day. Like it's been raining for freaking months. And you're thinking, well, hell, the time to have been preparing for that would have been, a year ago. But but it's always good to have this thing in the back of your mind in terms of how much you should have in cash reserves. So I totally get that. And I think it's a very fair question. But I'll go back to what is it your vision? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And, are you looking to grow your current business, or are you looking to just keep what it is that you have? And that stage of in your life is I think it's going to dictate how you answer this question. But it also really is important in terms of how you are analyzing your cash flow in the first place. So let me bring this up to another point. So when you're analyzing the cash flow for your rental properties initially, I know this is something that I did when I was first analyzing cash flow for my properties. Pretty much what I would do is I would get a rough idea in terms of the amount of rent that I could get for the property. And then I would see if I could cover the PITI, which is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance for the mortgage payment. And if I cleared it by a good enough number, generally $150-ish would be fantastic, then I would go ahead and move forward with the deal. That's it. That's as far as the analysis that I did. Okay. So if you are knowing anything at all about getting into rental real estate, you know that that's not enough. And I got taken to the cleaners because of the way that I was analyzing properties. It was a complete and total disaster. So when I decided that, okay, well, that sucks because that's not working. And of course, I went into 2008 with all these properties that I had been pregnant with, then trying to figure out how to make this work using this crappy cash flow analysis that I had been using for years. Well, again, I was kind of caught up in using other people's money, and I didn't have any money into my own, very little of my own cash in the deal because I didn't have a lot of cash. I was just coming out of the Marine Corps, didn't have a whole lot to put down. I had some cash reserves and my whole life policy, I had some credit cards I could borrow from, things like that. But I really didn't have a whole lot of my own cash. So I started, borrowing from basically whoever would loan me money to get me into these properties. So when I was analyzing cash flow, I wasn't even analyzing the very, very basics in terms of cash reserves for things like even the basics like mowing the lawn or even doing repairs and maintenance. And you might be thinking, well, if I'm getting into a single family dwelling, which most of you know that I do, most of you know that fundamentally what I've always done is rent single family homes. So you might be thinking, well, shouldn't the residents be taking care of the lawn mowing? I don't even have to mess with that. That is true. But what happens when the property is vacant? What happens when someone moves out, the property sits vacant for 4 or 5 weeks? The property is the lawn mowing is going to need to be done. The repairs and maintenance on the property are going to need to be done somebody ideally other than me, right? So if I don't budget for that stuff, guess what? I've created a job for myself. So here's what I want you to understand. For every line item, for every expense item that you don't budget for, becomes a job that you have to do, becomes a job that you've created for yourself. Ask me how I know. Okay? Because I created a leasing job for myself. I created a bookkeeping job for myself. I created a lawn mowing job, a collections job, a repairs and maintenance job, a leasing job, all these different jobs that I created for myself. And they were paying me basically nothing because all I was clearing was about $100, maybe $125. If I was lucky, $150 a month, amortized over the amount of hours that I was putting in. I mean, a lot of times I'd have made more money working a job at McDonald's. I certainly would have had more free time. So there's one line item, though, that I haven't really talked about, and that's vacancy expense. Now, I see a lot of people when they're doing this cash flow analysis, and they'll throw on vacancy expense, and they'll just say, well, vacancy expense of 10%. And I don't think they really understand why, like, what's the 10% even about? What's the 10% in vacancy even about? Well, vacancy, first and foremost, is a measurement of time, okay? So when you're saying that, well, I'm going to throw in 10% vacancy, seems good enough. I heard that on a Deeper Pockets episode, so it must be good, right? No, well, understand that vacancy is a measurement of time. So when you say 10% vacancy, that means you're going to take 10% out of your $1,500 a month in rent, and you're going to take 10% and a lot towards vacancy. So you're going to take $150 a month, stick that in a separate account to account for your vacancy, to offset the risk of vacancy. Okay, that's what that really is. But when you think about it for a second, 10% vacancy, that's 10% of a year. So 12 months out of the year, you're saying 1.2 months you're going to be vacant, right? So thanks for the thumbs up. So you're saying 10, so 1.2 months out of the year you're going to be vacant. You're going to have a vacancy in or you're going to allot for that vacancy. So when you stop and think about it for a second, is that enough? Or should you even allocate more? So you're thinking 5.2 weeks from the point where you go from $0 to getting the property moved out, trashed out, cleaned, turned, and marketed and released to where someone's going to be handing you a check and you're handing them keys. That's going to take a little over 5 weeks. Is that reasonable? For some people, that might be. For some people, it might be completely unreasonable. There's no way in hell you're going to do that because you're working another job and you're a weekend warrior and you're going to try to do that stuff, after work on, during the week and Saturdays and Sundays. And this is how you set up your business. I'm not judging. This is confession, right? I've done the same thing. And I did that for years. And I didn't value my free time. I didn't care that I was working on the weekends because I didn't mind putting in my dues, right? But here's the thing. This is where it comes down to how much did you have in cash reserves, okay? So think about this for just a second. That 10% vacancy, that's generally analyzed over the course of a year, right? So follow me here for just a second. If you're budgeting that 10% of the time the property is going to be vacant, that would be 10% out of the year, right? Well, then wouldn't it make sense that you'd want to keep that property rented for as long as possible to one resident? Because if you can go longer than a year, then that $150 that you were allocating for your vacancy expense, well, guess what? You don't have to allocate for that anymore because now it goes straight to your bottom line, right? So that $150, if you're good at getting these properties and keeping these properties rented, then it makes sense that that $150 now goes towards the bottom line. And what would you do? Spend it? Would you deleverage with it? Would you put it in another cash account? Would you maybe want to boost up your capital expenditure account? Whatever that is, right? But keep in mind, that's why you've got to have a good idea of your numbers. You have to know your numbers. So that's when I go back to vision. All right. So in terms of how much should you have in cash reserves, it depends. If you're looking to grow your portfolio, a lot of banks, especially if you're getting bank financing, a lot of banks are going to require you to have 3 to 6 months of PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Basically 3 to 6 months of mortgage payments. Well, is that enough? Well, if you're not allocating enough for anything else, I would say it probably is not near enough, because you're not budgeting for repairs and maintenance and leasing expense, certainly not vacancy expense, all this other stuff. So it depends. That's why I say 3 to 6 months of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. It might be enough if you've got enough in other accounts to handle your maintenance, your vacancy expense, your maintenance expense, your leasing expense, things like that. Okay, I hope I'm making sense here, because it really depends on how you analyze the cash flow of your property on the other side. Because if it's just 3 to 6 months of PITI, and then all of a sudden you have you haven't been budgeting for capital expenditure, right? Meaning like you need a new roof, you need a new furnace, and all of a sudden you need a new furnace, then 3 to 6 months, that's not near enough. You're going to get chewed. That's going to disappear immediately. Back in my, when I got into real trouble back in 08 and 09, I had what I thought was plenty of reserves, right? About $150,000 in cash on a $6 million real estate portfolio. Not near enough, because I only budgeted for about $100 to $200 a month in profit on each one of those units. It wasn't near enough. And I lost that in about 40 days. So that sucked hard. Okay. But that's why I say, when you're going and you're looking at these, you're making these mistakes, because I've made these mistakes, these exact mistakes that really cost me, and it cost me about 2/3 of my portfolio when finally the foreclosures started to come. And boy, did they come. And they came for blood. One final thing I want you to think about, though, is I know that there are some people who say, well, I've got a line of credit for X amount of dollars from my bank, or I've got a home equity line of credit against my home. If you did not go through any economic down period, especially one that is where the banks are getting hit hard, one of the first things that gets dried up is the lines of credit, business lines of credit, any lines of credit specifically, especially unsecured lines of credit or home equity lines of credit. Those go away very quickly, meaning they just shut them off. So I would not, if you want to have some of that maybe as a cushion, that's fine. But you really need to think about cash and cash reserves. And where could you be holding your cash or cash reserves? And actual cash, you could have maybe an IRA. Maybe you've put your money, maybe you've dialing into the infinite banking concept and putting that into a whole life insurance policy where you've got cash value. Whatever it is that you do, make sure that cash reserve is held sacred, so you're not scrambling around if something like 2008 or 2009 comes along again. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Once again, I'll wrap this up, but if you are interested in the download, it talks about this very thing. Also, pretty much how to analyze the cash flow on your properties the right way so you can avoid those mistakes. I would invite you to go over to landlordcoach.com/5 mistakes. So one final thing here, and this is a quote that I love this from Mark Twain. I think bankers get beat up a little bit but this is pretty much a true statement. A banker is a fellow who loans you his umbrella when the sun is shining, but wants it back the minute it begins to rain. And that, of course, is by Mark Twain. That's all I have for today, everybody. Please be sure to place a value on your free time, because if you don't, someone else will. Most important, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have an awesome day, Have a great Thanksgiving if you don't see me until then. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Have a great day. Take good care.